Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. After today's presentation, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. To ask a question at that time, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would like to turn the call over to Ms. Linda Abbruzzese. Ma'am, you may begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon for those of you joining on the East Coast, and good morning for those of you joining on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us for our SBA Trade Finance webinar. I am pleased to note that we have more than 36 people joining us for our webinar today. My name is Linda Abbruzzese, and I'm a Senior International Trade Specialist for the Global Knowledge Center at the Department of Commerce. This webinar is being brought to you in cooperation by the Global Knowledge Center and the Small Business Administration, and I'd like to welcome all the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service clients and SBA participants joining us and colleagues joining us from all across the United States to learn about export loans available through the U.S. Small Business Administration and other global business solutions from the federal government. You'll also learn tips from a small business exporter who has used these SBA programs successfully to enter new markets and increase export sales, and you will hear directly from an SBA lender on how to prepare to get the financing you need to grow your export business. During this webinar, you will be able to ask questions and get answers from the speakers. In a moment, I'll turn this presentation over to Mr. Chris Fulton, who is the president of CariCop Incorporated. The next speaker would be Chantal Whitman, who is the vice president of trade finance for the First American Bank. I then have Mary Hernandez, who is the regional manager for the Small Business Administration International Trade Programs. All of our speakers will be available at the end of this presentation to answer your questions. Contact information will also be provided. But before we begin, for those of you who just joined, you can still log into this webinar by entering the URL website and passcode, and we are going to give you some instructions on how to get the most benefit from today's webinar. You'll be able to hear this presentation via your telephone and view it simultaneously via your computer. So if you are not hooked up through both, please take a moment to do this. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please press star 0 anytime during this presentation. Now, during this webinar, we will be taking voice and written questions. To ask a voice question, please press star 1 on your telephone. Now, to ask a written question, we invite you to type in your questions on your screen as they occur to you during this presentation. There is an icon on the upper left-hand side of your screen with the letters Q&A. Obviously, Q&A stands for questions and answers, where you can click and type in your questions anytime during this presentation. What we will do is we will compile these questions and present as many as time allows during this webinar. Type questions which are not answered during this webinar due to time constraints, we will get back to you via a personal email. And I'd just like to remind everybody that you can still log on to this webinar by the login instructions that were given you by email. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, Mr. Chris Fulton of CariCop Incorporated. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Linda, and I want to say hello to all the SBA people. Thank you, and to any other brethren, small exporters that are listening. My name is Chris Fulton, and I'm the founder and president of a small company called CariCap, Inc. CariCap stands for Cari, Caribbean, CA for Central America, and P for pipe, Caribbean Central American pipe, and we sell pipes, valves, and fittings in the Caribbean and Latin America. We first learned about Mary and Chantal when we were working in the Dominican Republic, selling our pipe, selling our fittings. We had some really good contacts. Things were going well for us, and all of a sudden we needed to start selling more pipes and fittings and valves than we had money for. There was going to be a golf course built, and we had worked with the owners of the golf course to get everything lined up, and nobody wanted to sell to the Dominicans. I did. I wanted to do business in the Dominican Republic, and this was a lot of pipe, mucho tubo. So we we're able to get the access to the capital through these programs. And that's my message to the other small business people listening is you can get access to this capital. As a matter of fact, your government, Uncle Sam, wants you to export. And once you get integrated with these programs, they're actually quite helpful. We were able to get a bank that would take our SBA guarantee and lend us capital, and we would buy our pipes and valves and fittings and our widgets and send them down to the Dominican Republic, give a nice 6 months for the customer to pay, and the customer would pay back the loans. And specifically, they wouldn't pay me back, they would just pay the bank back. So it made for a nice triangle there.
You're an agent for the cup manufacturers.
I started CarryCap as a back bedroom Miami export trading company in the early 1990s. That means I had a fax machine in a spare bedroom, and I had a map, and I had a couple of manufacturers who believed in me, but the only money I had was what few $1,000s myself and my family could put together. So obviously when these big opportunities came up, you know, Mary and Chantal, y'all were critical to help us seize those opportunities. I hate to think where CarryCap would be had we not been able to hold on for that roller coaster ride and all that good business that we did there and we continue to do. Another point I would like to tell the exporters out there who are listening is once you have these tools in your toolbox, whether you use them or not sometimes doesn't come into play. I'll go into negotiations on a deal or an irrigation project or a waterworks project, and just knowing that we could finance it and we do have access to capital, even though we don't use a program, it keeps you, the salesman, in the conversation. Because you're the sales guy down there, you're the businessman down there that can say, quite frankly, don't worry about the money. If we really need to get the money, we can go through these steps, we can jump through these hoops, we can fill out these forms, we can turn in these financial statements, we can do these interviews, and we can get the money, so don't worry about the money. Sometimes that's all that's needed for you to get to the end of the deal, and when you finally close the deal, they decide they don't want to go through all those steps, they'll just go ahead and pay. But I find that having the foundation of being able to wield these programs and having access to the capital is sometimes fundamental to closing deals when we don't even use the program. And then, if you're working in the same markets, we work in the Caribbean over and over and over, after about no time, after about 1 year, the reputation spreads that, oh yeah, that's that little company that solves all the money problems. That's that little company that makes things happen, and you can get a reputation in Costa Rica or in Trinidad or in the Dominican Republic as the guy that has the money. Now, you have to be careful. I find my customers often think that I have the money. And believe me, we do not have millions, and I have to slow them down and explain, I do not have this money, but I know where to go and borrow this money.
Chris, maybe I'll interrupt. This is Chantal from First American Bank. We've known each other a long time, but I believe the first time that you accessed a bank facilities was with First American Bank, and one of the programs, the first program we looked at with SBA was the Export Working Capital line of credit, correct?
That's correct.
And how did you when we first started to talk about it, you had a buyer and quite a large sale of pipe that was going to outfit the golf course in the Dominican Republic. And I believe one of the things that I suggested at that time was to look at credit insurance to see if the buyer could be approved. That would be one of the options that you had, because they were looking for financing and you were looking for a way to get the sale consummated. And so were you successful in getting credit insurance on that particular buyer?
Right, and that's the basis. Actually, before you get to the basis, I had to let go of the idea that other people were getting in on my deal. And you, Chantel, said, Chris, you got to trust us. We have the capital available for this. So we got the buyer. The buyer was the Capcana Group, I believe Centercon was the name. And once we got the insurance policy from Uncle Sam, from Ex-Im Bank, insuring the Dominican buyer, then I was able to give that policy to you.
Right.
And you loaned me.
And in addition, we first looked at you as a company. We looked at your viability as an exporter. We looked at the financials that your company had. You'd been in business for a few years. And we looked also at a personal credit score and your repayment experience with other people that you had been repaying. So we looked at those types of things in order to analyze whether or not you fit into the parameters of an SBA program and also whether you fit into the parameters of the credit standards for the bank. And we were successfully able to help you at that point in time with an export working capital line to finance that particular contract you had with that foreign buyer by using not only the Ex-Im Bank credit insurance as a vehicle for that, but also the actual contract from the buyer at that point in time.
Right.
And so the way that we financed CarryCap at that point was they provided us with a copy of the contract, and we did this particular loan as a purchase order financing type of loan, transactional financing based upon the one contract that he had. And so he provided us with a contract, and we looked at what his profit margin was, and we gave him up to 80% of that particular contract.
Which was all I needed. Which
was what he needed to be basically be able to pay for the pipes that he was buying, I believe, from a OEM in Nebraska, and basically, or somewhere in the Midwest.
Right.
He was buying the.
It was a manufacturer. It wasn't an OEM.
It was a manufacturer a manufacturer he was buying from. And so he was able to pay his supplier and take a discount on that by paying the supplier in advance.
Correct.
And then at that point in time, he was then able to consolidate the shipments, ship the pipes, ship the fittings to the project in the Dominican Republic, and then he had approval under his Ex-Im Bank insurance policy, and he could have used private credit insurance as well. That would have been another option for him at the time. But he had an Ex-Im Bank policy, and that policy allowed for him to ship up to 180-day terms to that buyer in the Dominican Republic. Given the financing, the buyer was very eager to work with CarryCap, obviously. CarryCap was a little bit suspicious that they did not want to take any risk, and their policy covered 95% in the event the Dominicans didn't pay. But Chris was willing to take a risk on this particular transaction because it was an entree into a much larger dealings, and he knew the golf course and knew the possibility of future business there. So essentially, he gave the buyers 180 days to repay, and this deal was successful. Obviously, that's why we're here to talk about it again. But the deal was successful, and the buyers repaid directly by a wire transfer to the bank. We then used that payment from the buyers to pay down the advance we had given CarryCap, and CarryCap got the remaining monies into their account to do what they wanted to with it. That was their profit margin on the transaction, and that deal was financed and done. Then Chris's line underneath the export working capital line rolled back up to the amount that he had at that time, and he was able to start looking at other transactions with the buyer as well, and also other buyers that he started to meet because he was able to offer the financing.
Right.
And so, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. If you look at the slide that's on your screen, that triangle, in the middle of that triangle is an insurance policy. And that's your insurance policy from SBA or from the Ex-Im Bank, or as I like to say, from Uncle Sam. That insurance policy basically says if your Peruvian or Indonesian or Jamaican customer doesn't pay you, that insurance policy is going to pay you 95 cents on the dollar. And that's just a great policy to have, even if you don't give it to the bank. Even if you put it under your pillow, Chantal, we do transactions where I just pay the premium on the insurance policy all the time. But when it gets exciting is when a big deal comes, and then carry cap, I give that insurance policy to you, the bank, and you give all that money. I guess you treat it as collateral.
Well, the policy itself is a way for you, the borrower, to be able to repay the loan. And so SBA does have certain parameters, and so do lenders as well, is that we want you to have every possible option of availability to repay any loan that we provide to you, whether it's just a commercial line of credit that I give you based upon your personal guarantee and the assets of your company, or whether it's a line that's done with the government.
Right.
We want to make sure that you have an ability to repay that loan.
Right, and my ability to repay that loan was that insurance policy, because I didn't have any assets.
Right.
Really remarkable assets. I didn't own any property.
But you had good repayment experience, and you had the financials of the company were showing that you were successful and you were running the business that was profitable. And so I think for the audience that's out there is that, yes, an insurance policy at the back end for when you're offering open account terms to your buyer is very important to have, not only for your protection, but to make sure that you get paid by the foreign buyer so that you are able to pay back the SBA loan, but also for your own ability to sleep at night, because you're giving open account terms to buyers that you might not know that much about. Also, it's a good marketing tool, like Chris was saying. It allowed him to go into new markets with new buyers and offer terms that he would normally not be comfortable with because of the financing aspect and just because of the length of time. Now, it's not always required under an SBA loan to have an insurance product, and it's not required, obviously, to have Exim Bank insurance. You could use a private sector insurance policy like COFAS or Euler or its Radius. But there are also other, if an exporter's been dealing with certain buyers for a long period of time, SBA looks at about 3 years of good repayment experience, they might allow a lender to waive the necessity for credit insurance. There might be cases where you've had very good experience and there's no need to get the insurance unless you really want to. And there are options where you might be able to just piggyback underneath an insurance policy or get one-off insurance for the one buyer that you do have a need for. There are also times where we'll look at borrowers that might be using letters of credit for their transactions. They might be with governments, or they might be with new buyers in certain markets that are a little bit more developing markets, and letters of credit are the norm, and we might take an assignment of proceeds of a letter of credit to be used as the repayment source underneath the loan advance that we give. So there are different options. It depends on the exporter and where they're selling as to what makes the most sense. We're looking at kind of the whole picture here. We're looking at the financial condition of the borrower. We look at normally 3 years of financials. We're looking at tax returns. If a company doesn't have reviewed or audited financials, we'll look at tax returns. We'll look at compiled numbers. We look at interim internal figures. We want to get the accounts receivable aging, accounts payable aging. We also want to get personal financial statements on the borrower. Anyone with 20% or more, we'd like to get personal financial statement information on the buyer so that we can run a personal credit score to look at the past history, of the borrower's repayment. So we're looking at the whole picture of the company.
And by the way, Chantal, since when the loan amounts were getting significant and we had to straighten up and get better financial auditing, that was great, and we maintain that till this day.
Right.
So our accounting is better to this day because we went through this process.
Right. So there's a lot of different options for exporters in terms of maybe looking at exploring SBA programs and exploring maybe a first-time relationship with a lender, or maybe looking at another lender who might be able to provide these types of products.
And this was just one of the programs that was available, the Export Working Capital Program, and we got CARICAP got very good at those, but there are other programs,
right,
and that's what we'll be talking about for our two companies later too.
So CARICAP has decided, business is back on track. The international economies are growing rapidly, and he's had a lot more success lately, and new distributors, I think, in Colombia and places like that.
Right.
And so now Chris is exploring maybe looking at the SBA Export Express program, which would allow him some permanent working capital, export working capital, to support his export sales. And this particular program is a little bit less labor intensive. When we first started working together, we were looking at transactional lending for you.
Yeah, because we would borrow the money to bill one invoice on one transaction. It would close, and basically we would rinse and repeat as often as we could.
And this other loan that SBA offers, the Export Express loan, would be a loan that would allow you to borrow when you want to borrow, and then you'd repay, you would repay interest.
And that we like
repay when you want.
And that gives us more flexibility because Panama is booming.
Right.
Colombia is booming. There's these little honeypots around the globe that are booming.
You can use the loan proceeds to finance some of the sales that you have. You can also use it to go to trade shows for some of your expenses associated with your traveling, with the marketing brochures you're looking at, maybe further strengthening your relationships with some suppliers. So that money can be used for all the export purposes that your company has.
Right.
You are a U.S. exporter, and one of the things that I want to clarify for a lot of people listening is that, although Chris does sell mainly U.S. products, 50% U.S. content, that's why he's able to also use the Ex-Im Bank credit insurance. There are opportunities that Chris has where he might be buying some product that's located in the United States. It's just not necessarily U.S. content, and we can still use SBA for that type of product as long as it's being shipped out of the United States. That particular product and those particular sales would be eligible underneath SBA. Whereas if you were drop shipping from China to Costa Rica, that would not be an eligible export sale that would be financed.
Right, and I'm sure that some of the exporters listening, we all do that. We all have, China to Peru and Spain to Jamaica and Colombia to Haiti. We all do those things. So just if they're consolidated in the U.S., then so the SBA can help.
This export loan, this Export Express program would be something that, if you want to consider it, what we'll do is we'll take a look at your recent financial information, last year's financial year end, and then your internal figures now. Get a new accounts receivable aging from you, an accounts payable aging from you. Let's get a new personal financial statement so that I can run a personal credit score on you, and let's just make sure that everything fits the parameters of the bank's credit standards, but also what I know about your company, I know you will already fit the mold for SBA in terms of an approved SBA client. So let's just start the ball rolling. There's an application that you'll have to fill out. I think it's called the SBA Form 1919, and we can get that into process as well.
And for the exporters on the line, if you're catching this dynamic, isn't it great to have a lender in front of me trying to lend me money? That's wonderful. That's not how it used to be.
And so, Chris, once I do get the application in from you, we'll take a look at it. The way that we'll go through the approval is that we will have an analysis done, and then obviously a credit approval internally at the bank. I mean, the bank first has to make a decision that you are a borrower that we want to work with. And at that point in time, once we've determined that we want to work with you, we then make sure that you are eligible for the SBA programs that we're looking at, and then we would go forward and get an SBA. We're a preferred lender, PLP lender with SBA. We'll go forward and get a SBA loan number, and we will start on the legal documents for you, and we could close this by the end of the month. So, and Mary, you might want to talk a little bit more about the programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Mary Hernandez, Regional Manager for the SBA's export loan programs in Florida, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands. So far today, you've heard from Chris Fulton from CARICAP, Inc., a small business who's had great success in exporting, and from Chantal Whitman from First American Bank, a lender who's active with both Ex-Im Banks and SBA's export finance programs. So now to summarize, I'd like to provide you with a quick overview of the SBA loan programs, just highlighting some of the ways they can help your small businesses begin or grow your export sales. We talked about the Export Working Capital Program, or the EWCP, and we have loans available up to $5 million under the EWCP loan program. The EWCP, as Chantal and Chris talked about, is used for transaction financing from purchase order to final collection. These lines are usually set up as a one-year revolving line of credit that can be used to finance an exporter's cost of goods for specific export orders or contracts. Or if you have a strong base of foreign receivables from month to month as well as export inventory, a lender can use those foreign receivables and export inventory as collateral to lend against. Generally, as Chris mentioned, lenders capture those incoming payments from your foreign buyers to pay down the amount which was advanced to you, but is now available to finance your next order. Export Express. The Export Express program is available for loans up to $500,000. This loan program helps small businesses develop or expand their export markets. For example, as Chantal said, if you need to cover costs associated with participating in a trade show or trade mission organized by the U.S. Commercial Service, or you need to translate your marketing materials into another language, or you need to hire additional staff to help you process your growing export sales, the Export Express loan can help you cover these types of costs. Why is it called Express? Because it provides exporters and lenders a streamlined way to obtain SBA-backed financing for loans and lines of credit up to $500,000. Lenders use their own forms and credit decision processes to make the loans. And the SBA is now waiving its fees on Export Express loans of $150,000 or less. So no guarantee fee due from the borrower and no ongoing servicing fee due from the lender. The International Trade Loan, or ITL loan, is also available for loans up to $5 million. The ITL offers loans to businesses that plan to start or continue exporting or that have been adversely affected by competition from imports. The small business must demonstrate that the loan proceeds will improve their competitive position, and in addition to providing financing for fixed assets such as equipment and machinery, and for debt refinancing, it can also be combined with a working capital line of credit. The ITL can also be used by small businesses who'd like to bring the manufacturing of their products back to the U.S., insourcing. Some eligibility criteria to keep in mind, however. Your business must be in operation for at least 12 months, although we can look at previous or proven expertise to meet the 12-month in operation requirement. Your business must be a small business, and that depends on your NAICS code, or North American Industry Classification System code, and you can find that on the SBA website under size standards. Basically, though, if you're a manufacturer, you can have between up to 100 and 1,500 employees. If you are a wholesaler, 100 to 500 employees, depending on the product that you're selling. Services is regulated by the dollar amounts, so $2.5 million to $21.5 million, again, depending on the service that you're providing. Some additional things to keep in mind, an exporter must take title to the goods, and those goods must be shipped from the U.S. So there you have just a general overview of what we've just discussed, and we'd like to open it up for questions.
If you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. To withdraw your question, please press star 2. Again, it is star 1 to ask a question. One moment, please. Jorge, your line is open.
Yes.
Hello.
Mary?
Yes.
Do you or can you provide us with a copy of your presentation?
Absolutely.
What do you need? My email?
You know, you have my contact information on this last slide, and if you can email me and just ask me for the PowerPoint presentation, I will respond to you right away and get that to you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Also, this is Linda Abrazizi for the Global Knowledge Center. We have an archive webinar library that's on export.gov, which does include archive webinars, and we do plan to have this uploaded there as well with not only the taping of today's webinar, but also with a PowerPoint presentation. So you can also view it that way, and I'm sure SBA will probably have something similar on their website as well.
Yes.
As a reminder, please press star 1 to ask a question. Jerry, your line is open.
Yes, for the International Trade Loan Program, as far as working capital, is there any degree as to how much of the use of the working capital will be for exporting? Is it like 100%, 50%, 70%? Is there any specific percentile?
No. I can, if you send me an email, I can give you a one-pager that outlines what the international trade loan could be used for, as well as the accompanying working capital loan. I can definitely get you some more detailed information.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Also, once again, this is Linda, and I just want to remind everyone, if you have any written questions, please note that there's a Q&A section about on the upper left-hand side of your screen. Looks like I do have a written question. It's from Jeff Dice. Excuse me if I didn't pronounce that correctly. It says, could you please talk a little bit more about when a bank will finance a business on a pre-export transaction basis? Often it seems lenders are very cautious of lending in this manner. Thank you.
Yes, I think I can answer that, and I think it's not usual. Not a lot of banks are doing purchase order financing, so it is more difficult to maybe find a lender doing it this way, the way that Chris and I were talking about in terms of lending on the contract. Although one of the things that I would suggest is you would touch base with a lender, that SBA, one of your SBA offices recommends, or give me a call, and we can talk about it. The main thing is that I really want to see you as a borrower, whether or not you can meet the lending criteria of the bank first. I want to make sure that, I can get you approved, per our bank's parameters. And then looking at your transaction, I'd like to see kind of evidence that you've done an export transaction before, and that evidence would be a copy of your export letter of credit or your export contract. I want to see a copy of the bill of lading. I want to see a copy of the commercial invoice, those types of things to establish kind of a baseline for your company that you've done these things before, and that I would feel comfortable with your documentation in order to want to lend on a new contract that is coming up, whether that's just an order for $50,000 or whether that's a $700,000 machine sale. So I want to feel comfortable as a lender that you know what you're doing and that we will be able to take a look at these things on a transactional basis. Chris, you might want to say something.
Thank you, Chantal. Jeff, yes, when I was looking for loans and looking for this and kind of figuring out the way SBA and Ex-Im Bank worked, I quickly realized there were banks and then there were trade finance banks. And all the regular banks that I knew about, I went in to talk to them about my export deal, and all they wanted to do was give me a mortgage loan. And it turns out that not every bank has a trade finance department. It turns out to be a specialty lending. Not everybody that has trade finance. Chantal has it. The other thing that I learned is, in the long run, the bank has to trust you. They're not just going to lend you because you fill out some forms. It really helps to get to know the bank. You need to let the bank meet your customers, and all of that stuff really makes things go more smoothly, as you might expect.
Thank you for the question.
Next question is from Steve. Your line is open.
Yes, I was just curious as to, is it more common for an exporter that's looking for this type of export loan to go directly to the bank or to go through an SBA representative?
It depends. I do get a lot of inquiries. People do tend to reach out to me first. I think the key is to talk directly to the exporter, understand the amount of financing that they need, what they need the proceeds for, and refer them to the right lender, because you don't want the lender to waste their time, you don't want the exporter to waste their time. So if you're better able to understand the exporter's business, again, exactly what they need, then you can refer them to the right lender, because not every lender participates in every loan program that we have available.
And Steve, this is something that I went through. This is Chris from CARICAP. You kind of have to align those planets. You got to get the program you want and the bank you want in the same room, on the same phone conversation, on the same page. So there's that getting the right program and the lender who thinks that program is fantastic, and you who are ready to go. So those things do have to line up.
So did you start with the bank, or did you start with SBA?
I started with
Chris and I met through another person that I had known that worked with a big manufacturer up in Illinois, and it was just a coincidental meeting that took place through a kind of a referral source. And then we started talking about the programs that were available, and
I said, "Oh, I've got one."
I've had a lot of experience in trade finance, and had been, these were some of the programs that we were already working with. So for Chris, it was a little bit different, but I do get most of my referrals, I think, from credit insurance brokers and from government organizations that know about what we can do. We're a very small bank, and we have a niche in trade finance, and there are lots of other banks that are out there doing SBA and Ex-Im Bank working capital programs. But it's just really, it's a personality business, too. I mean, you have to really understand who you're working with and if they're advocating for you as well.
Yeah. So I went to the bank first, found the program later.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
And again, please press star 1 to ask a question.
This is Linda. I have a question for Mary. Where are the offices located for SBA? Are they only in D.C. or are they all spread out through the United States? Where are they centrally located?
Actually, I have colleagues that are spread out throughout the country. So we each have territories, and we each know the lenders that are active with our programs within our particular territories. So an exporter can go onto our website and actually look up each of the representatives for all of the different areas. So we're out on the ground. We're on the ground, not all based out of D.C. We work very closely with the district offices in our territories, so very accessible. So I would recommend that folks go on to the SBA.gov, our website, and look up the contact information for the folks that cover their territory, where they're based.
Okay, great. Thank you. And while we were talking, I do have another question. This question is from Mike Fazio. It says, do you have examples of exporting services?
Services. This is Chris from CARICAP. We were exporting materials. We were not exporting services. Chantal?
Yes, services we do. Architectural firms, engineering services, design, home design, all kinds of services.
As long as it's being performed by U.S. personnel, then those are eligible export services.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another written question here is from Gregory Yerxa. The question is, please mention the role of the district international trade officers with regard to finding the appropriate resources throughout the USIAC's and SBA's international trade offices as well as district offices.
Let me jump in as the small businessman and say, wow, that sounds like government bureaucracy right there.
Actually, I think it's the exact opposite, because we are trying to think outside of the box. And as I mentioned, there are, 19 of us spread throughout the country. The regional managers for the SBA's export loan programs are very focused on working with lenders and exporters, small businesses, that we try to get the word out, but obviously we're just one person for a big territory. So we rely very heavily on our district international trade officers that are based out of the district offices. And, for example, Charles Long out of Tampa or Rosalind Bryant out of Jacksonville, they support me in the state of Florida. And so they know our programs. They know what questions to ask when they meet with a small business so that they themselves can refer them to an active lender in Tampa or Jacksonville, or if they need a little support from me to make sure that they point the exporter in the right direction, they'll reach out to me. So it's just, I mean, it's just
my feeling is
can't do without them.
My feeling is that anybody that knows anything about these SBA export loan programs is a valuable person to the U.S. exporter, because you would think that these loan programs would be widespread and would be well known amongst bankers and amongst exporters, and they're just not. And so anybody that can talk about it and market it and publish it and wave the flag is going to be good for U.S. exporters and good for the U.S. economy.
Okay, great, thank you. And once again, I'll turn over to the operator for any written or voice questions.
And I show no further questions at this time.
Okay, and that concludes then our webinar. I'd like to let everyone know and remind you that please note the contact information that's in front of your screen to get in contact with Mary on any SBA-related question. Also, if you do happen to have questions that occur to you after the conclusion of this webinar, please feel free to type them in under the Q&A section on the upper left-hand side of your computer. Also, please check out, as Mary had mentioned, the SBA's website at www.sba.gov, and also check out the Global Knowledge Center's website, which is www.export.gov, for more information on webinars such as these and upcoming events. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you, Mr. Chris Fulton, Ms. Chantal Whitman, and also Ms. Mary Hernandez for your expertise and time today. Also, thanks to all of our participants for joining in, and please check your email boxes for more information on upcoming webinars. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
This does conclude today's conference. Please disconnect at this time.